both sides and understand the challenges that both sides are facing.
Again, this is Joel Leyden speaking from the Jewish News Agency. I'm interviewing Yoni, a very articulate, knowledgeable authority on Jewish and Israeli public affairs. And we're discussing the state of anti-Semitism. What we're talking about right now is the fact that our perceptions and how we respond to anti-Semitism is very, very different from being in Tel Aviv or being in Los Angeles or being in Paris. That our backgrounds are completely different. And that it is, I believe what Yoni is saying, it's critically important that we close this gap, that we communicate more, that the Israeli checkpoints that are set up aren't there just to make life inconvenient for the Palestinians. I believe through my experience, and I've been at several checkpoints over many, many years, we do not mean any harm. I mean, if we could make life better for our neighbors, we will. I mean, these are human beings no different than we are. We provide a tremendous amount of kavod, so much kavod, respect, that we place our lives on the line. We even have humanitarian officers at our checkpoints to make sure that people are being treated with respect. At the same time, you have a small percentage of Palestinians, small, that mean to do us harm, that are being paid by Iran via Hamas or Hezbollah or Islamic Jihad to kill us. And we find their weapons as they are coming to these checkpoints, whether it be a gun, whether it be a rifle, whether it be a grenade, or whether it be a suicide bomber. I mean, I've encountered these people. Now, the Americans living in New York or in Boston or in Los Angeles has not had these experiences. You do get exposed to a tremendous amount of Iranian, Qatari propaganda. And do you want to discuss that, Yoni? I mean, because again, you're online, you see what I see in terms of the abundance amount of propaganda against Israel, against Jews.
Yeah, and I think that when you asked me sort of what sets me apart from other accounts, I know there's other figures doing this and they should be commended as well, but there aren't enough of them. And what I mean by that is there's not enough Jews out there prioritizing their Jewish identity over their political identity. And I know I recently tweeted about this, I think either a few hours ago or yesterday. But in essence, we have a problem in the United States where the Jewish American community finds itself unable sometimes to combat anti-Semitism because a lot of the times Jews will see themselves as Democrat or Republican before they'll see themselves as Jews. And so what happens is you inevitably go down this slide where you get conditioned to be absorbed into the tribalistic politics that we're seeing in the US. I mean, it's so hard to find individuals out there that will say, well, look, I'm a conservative, but I believe Trump or such and such figure inside of the Republican Party invoked anti-Semitism, and I absolutely condemn it, without having or feeling the need to invoke the anti-Semitism that they see on the other side. It's as if everything that we talk about regarding anti-Semitism needs to yield political points for the party we favor. So I'll give you an example of that. We first had a couple weeks ago the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, and Linda Sarsour was invited to speak as a delegate for Bernie Sanders. One of the things that I immediately enjoyed seeing was that just a few hours after she spoke, the Biden campaign came out and repudiated her views and said these absolutely do not align with the views that our party holds as acceptable. And don't quote me on that. I'm just um, paraphrasing. But I immediately felt the need to applaud that. And I won't share with the audience who I prefer to win, because to be honest, I don't know who I prefer to win. But I thought that regardless of who my preference for a future American president would be, that needed to be applauded. And I immediately tweeted that out there, and I must have lost a good 60, 70 followers. And I was okay with that. I was okay with that. And I'll tell you why, because a week later, we had the RNC, the Republican National Convention. And what was her name? Maria Ann Mendoza was scheduled to speak. And just a few hours before she spoke, she had either tweeted or retweeted a thread on Twitter that contained several anti-Semitic tropes. And the RNC did the right thing and basically canceled her speaking engagement at the RNC. And that needed to be applauded. And I lost followers over that as well. And so, wait a minute.
So you're between a rock and a hard place. Being a moderate, you're getting attacked by both sides.
I'm sorry, but my Jewish identity came thousands of years before the Republican Party or the Democrat Party were even created. It's that simple. You can be a staunch Democrat, you can be a staunch Republican, you can be pro-Trump, you can be anti-Trump. I don't care. But we're Jews first. And that doesn't mean that we have an allegiance to the Jewish state before to America. No, that's absolutely not what I mean. But we do have an allegiance to combat anti-Semitism regardless where it comes from. An anti-Semitism, whether it comes from the right or left, is not going to get a pass from me. And I have to tell you, I think that if I were to do otherwise and just stick to condemning one particular side of the political spectrum, I would have a lot more followers than I do today.
I don't believe that could have been better articulated, Yoni. And again, this is the reason why I wanted to speak to you online. Is that scotch you're drinking, or is that water?
No, it's too early for scotch, just water.
Okay. No, you're right on point. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But you approach anti-Semitism and the threat and the bombardment that we are confronted with, let's say here in the States, from, in Hebrew we'd say Rosh Gadol, from a very large mind, from a very large radar in terms of looking at the forest, not the trees, in terms of what is going on here. Because yeah, I know many people who are very right-wing and attack the left and attack the anti-Semitism coming from the left, whether it be Code Pink or Jewish Voice for Peace, and I could mention at least a half dozen different organizations. And I could look at left-wing organizations that are doing the exact same thing, attacking Trump or attacking other elements on the right side that they believe are inciting anti-Semitism. And instead of going left or going right, as you have just very well stated, it's not left or right. We're Jews. So yeah, we have pimples. We make mistakes being on the left. We make mistakes being on the right. And let us not block each other over that. I was just recently, not blocked, but unfriended by a very well-respected Israeli American living in Israel over him being very right-wing and I confronting him on a few things, but doing it from a perspective which is not left or right. And he's only right. And there are other people who are only left. And I believe what you've stated too is that this is a very important issue that needs to be addressed. And perhaps the most potent way of addressing that is through more communication. Do we have that communication today? Can we rely upon the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, for instance, for providing this communication? I don't see it. So I'm asking you. I mean, maybe you see something I don't see.
I mean, I I prefer not to get into the particulars of how other organizations engage with this, but I can tell you that we can all be doing better, and I include myself in it. Oftentimes, um, it's either a conscious bias or an unconscious bias. I'm not sure what it is, but we all need to do this constant self-reflection, and say that presidents come and go, political parties, if you know the U.S. history, come and go. But you know, if we don't do this for ourselves, no one's going to do it for us. And it's that simple. I mean, as we sit right now, San Francisco State University is refusing to reject their invitation of Leila Khalid to speak. For those of you who don't know, Leila Khalid was not just, but is a member of the PFLP, the Palestinian Front,
Liberation.
the Popular Front for the Palestinian Liberation, which is a U.S. designated terrorist organization, who hijacked a plane, a civilian plane, and is being invited to speak on a college campus. And San Francisco State University, I can assure you, because I participated in this, received very detailed documentation as to what her involvement was. And here is a public university receiving federal funding, inviting convicted terrorist on a campus to speak. So either two things are happening here. It's either terrorists are now being invited to speak on a college campus, or it's not terrorism when Israelis are the victims, right?
Is it terrorism or is it freedom fighting?
No, there's no there's no freedom fighting, and I can tell you maybe that's a failure of international law in the inability of the international community to come to a conclusive decision to determine what the definition of terrorism should be. But I mean, come on, 9/11 happened less than 2 decades ago, and if you're comfortable with saying that 9/11 was a terrorist attack, not just because of the horrible 3,000 plus lives that it took, but also for the act of hijacking a civilian plane, but you don't feel the same need to say the same thing when Israelis were the majority of passengers on board, then your problem isn't with defining terrorism slash freedom fighting. Your problem is anti-Semitism,
Okay,
right?
so Yoni, let me hold you right there. We're quickly approaching 9/11, and in approaching September 11th, the attack on the World Trade Center, the attack on Washington, on the Pentagon, we lost over close to 4,000 lives. Um, aren't there people out there who say that the Jews were behind that?
You know, when we were talking about who we choose to engage with before, there's individuals I don't engage with, and that includes those that
But could that be a mistake that we're making? Because, like a cancer, it could be very, very small. You're uneducated. You've got no idea.
yeah,
You get this propaganda. You and I, for the most part, leave me alone. Leave me. I don't want to know about this. But are we making a mistake by ignoring this?
I it's not a recursive, it's not an accusation that I see gaining a lot of momentum or in a lot of you know, important platforms out there.
Maybe
Very,
Yoni,
very
but this
fringe.
is part of.
I'll say that it's a very subjective approach. That
Maybe
means
we don't see all of it.
I'll just say that it's a subjective approach, and just because I choose not to engage with it does not mean that I condemn or advise others not to do it. I think that everyone needs to do what they're comfortable with and their philosophy. I choose, I'll debate anyone, which is the same approach that Alan Dershowitz has or had when he was active in debating. But he also said, I don't debate Holocaust deniers. And I share that approach, not just for Holocaust deniers, but I would include in that field those that say that Jews were behind 9/11. But of course, if anyone wants to, write an opinion piece or engage in public debate, outlining why that's an outrageous and defamatory claim, then absolutely.
So
By
that
all,
brings us to why Yoni and Joel are talking right now, and that is you have several very effective thoughts in terms of how one can fight anti-Semitism. How can an American address anti-Semitism? You see something or you hear something, you're outside offline, you're in a store and you hear something, you hear a remark, or you're online and you see something. How do we win the fight against anti-Semitism?
I think number one, and this is not something that's going to be done overnight, it needs to start within the Jewish community. I'm by no means insinuating that anti-Semitism can be cured by Jews, that would borderline victim blaming, and that's absolutely not what I'm saying. What I mean is it starts with an exercise within the Jewish community to see ourselves first and foremost as Jews and put aside our political tendencies, or make them secondary or tertiary. And that doesn't mean that you become less passionate about issues like pro-life or pro-choice, pro-guns or anti-guns, but the safety and the well-being and the equality of the Jewish American community, and respectively of Jewish communities in whatever country we're trying to combat anti-Semitism. Jewish identity needs to transcend everything else. And the moment we do that is the moment where we say we are not going to fall into the game of tribalistic politics. I don't care where anti-Semitism comes from, either the left or the right. I don't care if my political candidate invokes anti-Semitism, and by me condemning it, I may be taking away points from him and giving it to the other. No. First, we're Jews, then we're Democrats, then we're Republicans or Tea Party, Independents, whatever political affiliation you want to have. But first, we're Jews, and that's number one and foremost. And then the second thing is, like I also covered earlier, we need to try to move away from this instinctive tendency to constantly want to fight and engage in meaningful dialogue. And like I said, I am not putting myself above any of this. This is still something I work with every single day and something I'm trying to get at. But there's no better example than Deshaun Jackson, who had ignorantly chosen to quote Hitler, or at least he thought he was quoting Hitler on his Instagram. And he was widely condemned by the Jewish community. And I believe in less than a week, he was on a Zoom call with a Holocaust survivor, right? And these are opportunities that we can't pass up, because if these individuals are using their platform to spread hatred, they can also use their platform to share their mistakes and share love, understanding, empathy, and the need to dismiss bigotry and condemn it wherever we see it. And oftentimes we can rush to the reply button and, take all of our frustration and anger out. And you have a right to do that. You do. No one's going to take that right away from you. But when we're talking about the effectiveness of combating anti-Semitism, what's a bigger victory? Shouting at Deshaun Jackson and condemning him for his bigotry without asking him in private to engage in dialogue and to speak and see what he could have done better, or to let him know the origins of the accusation that he put forward? we assumed positive intentions, and Deshaun Jackson surprised us all. And to some extent, we saw a very similar story with Nick Cannon, who I know has been working closely with the AJC to share his story and to talk about his mistakes and to talk
The
about
AJC being
the
American Jewish Congress,
committee.
American Jewish Committee.
Yeah. Um, um, but I don't believe that it's the American Jewish community, because I know they do international work. It is the American Jewish community, which they're actually opening up an office in Dubai, I recently heard, or in the UAE, which is very exciting. But in essence, Nick Cannon has been working closely with them, sharing their story, and sharing his story and sharing his mistakes, and advocating for closer ties between the Black American community and the Jewish American community. And these are critical points that we need to applaud, and we need to take them as victories. And that's something we all need to work more effectively towards.
What do you believe is the reason for the surge in anti-Semitism in the United States?
Um, that's an interesting question. I don't believe there's a surge. I believe there's just more exposure and there's better documentation.
FBI says it's, FBI just even came out today again saying the
Sure,
greatest threat to Americans and the greatest threat to American Jews
sure, but the
are the
FBI,
white supremacists.
right? But the FBI bases those statistics off documentations of the manifestation of anti-Semitism. In other words, they can't make those statistics based on a held ideology. They can only do it when the ideology is manifested into an anti-Semitic attack. And so that's what I mean, and that I don't know if there's necessarily a surge. I do believe there's a certain degree of comfortability to act on the ideology that's been held.
So let me ask. So let me ask you this, and getting away from a more philosophical perspective, more of an academic, and to a more practical perspective. What would your words of advice be to the American Jewish community in regards to how to confront anti-Semitism as we're approaching the high holidays? Because I believe that we are at a point here in the States where we are experiencing a surge. The FBI, I'm on the security committee of my synagogue. We're getting information from the Department of Homeland Security saying be on alert. Make sure you've got physical security around your synagogue. We've already had the Tree of Life. We've already experienced a great number of anti-Semitic incidents in the States, mostly nonviolent, thank God, a few violent. But they're expecting an increase, and they're expecting an increase as we approach and we are in the high holidays. What would you suggest to the American Jewish community in regards to an immediate response and in terms of a long-term response?
This year we're celebrating the start of the year 5,781. And I hate to go back to this, but I deeply believe that it's the key to unlocking a successful campaign against anti-Semitism in the US. But the key is to ask ourselves, where was the Democratic Party and where was the Republican Party when we celebrated the year 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or even 5,000? Where were they? They weren't here. It was just us. And obstacles come and go, but we can't fall into the deep dividing partisanship of the United States. We've the Jews, and I'll include myself in it. We like to brag that we outlived the Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, that we outlived the Assyrians, and we outlived every we outlived the Nazis, and we outlived, you know, Haj Amin al-Husseini, and that every dictator or every uh, every people that has looked for our destruction has attempted, and then they're not here on the map, but we are. And we like to brag about these things, but I don't know how much critical thinking we're doing as to what led to us being able to achieve the ability to survive. And I think that that has to fundamentally be our ability to come together when we've faced existential threats. And I don't want to say that the degree of anti-Semitism that we're facing right now is posing an existential threat on the Jewish American community, but why not perceive it that way? Tell that to the Jews who went through the shooting in San Diego, or tell that to the Jews who went through the shooting at Pittsburgh. For them, it was an existential threat, right? And again, I come back to this. We are Jews first, then we're Republican, or then we're Democrat. And until we're able to do that, we're not going to be able to agree on the fundamental requirements to launch a successful campaign against anti-Semitism. It just has to.
So your message there, how do we get that message out?
Keep tweeting. No, I think that we continue to have these conversations, and that we stop trying to surround ourselves with people who agree with us. That's an old, outdated method. Stop that. You know, don't do that. That's not enriching. That's not uh, that doesn't challenge your critical thinking. That doesn't expose you to new ideas. That doesn't question your own beliefs. You know, we're better than that. Jews are top notch when it comes to arguing, and if there's a people out there that knows how to argue and take something from these arguments, it's us. So we need to do that better.
What do you suggest?
Again, it's
When you say keep tweeting, I think
it's
you and
not
I
just,
are, I
it's not
think you
just,
and I are kind of an academic minority. Most people are not on Twitter. Twitter is very large. It's very, very big, very powerful. Not as big as Facebook. This is my, my perspective. Again, also different demographics. You also have Instagram. You also have LinkedIn. But as far as I want to put up a nice picture of my dog or cat, that's Facebook. Maybe I want to argue politics. That could be Facebook as well too. Are we looking at what platform would you say? I mean, although you and I gravitate towards Twitter, and we have our reasons, maybe we enjoy the thrill of being real time in terms of addressing headlines and that sort of thing. Do you think it's more effective for the American Jew to be confronting anti-Semitism and trying to engage in civil debate regarding
sure.
on Facebook or Twitter? I mean, which platform would you?
Sure, and you know, again, I'll say that oftentimes we feel this power when social media gives us a voice, but oftentimes it can be just as simple as amplifying someone else's good message rather than feeling the need to put your own out there and not drown out the good voices. And I try to do that as well. When someone makes a very powerful and positive point that doesn't need to be rectified or added, I try to give that person access to my platform by sharing or retweeting their stuff. Um, and you know, it can sometimes feel sluggish, but we're each members to particular communities all around the country, and we can have an impact in our own community. We can ask to have these programs. We can ask to invite people to have these important conversations and to talk about the need to prioritize our Jewish values or the need to engage in civil discourse and all these things. It starts with us, and I'm a very big believer that slow and steady wins the race.
Okay, so let me ask you a few very fine questions, and then we'll go into a summary, to a conclusion. Take, for instance, President Trump. President Trump, in regards to addressing Charlottesville, had stated that there were very fine people on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address that?
To be honest, I don't know if I'm the right person to address that.
Yoni, you are.
I don't know.
You are. You are.
No,
For it.
I say that because I didn't follow the episode so closely, and I know that it's been widely spoken about. Um, I I would never presume to know what he wanted to say. Definitely would not want to do that. I think that some would argue that he was saying there were fine people in the respect that the white supremacists that were out there marching, whatever despicable ideology they held, were abiding by their constitutional rights to do so without inciting violence or being violent themselves. I know that other people would criticize him by trying to establish some sort of moral equivalency between the people that were out there condemning white supremacy and the ideology that the white supremacists were preaching. Either way.
And when President Trump came out, his defense of having said that said, well, look, you had a bunch of people on the left side condemning the fact that these people on the right side, although he's not mentioning left or right, they wanted to take down a statue of General Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anyone who knows American history knows that General Lee was
led the Confederate forces,
representing the South, the Confederate forces, which was embracing slavery. Mm-hmm. And it's not a hidden fact. I mean, there's a reason why
the notion of tearing down statues, I think it's a separate one. But I'll say this: whatever Trump's intention was, it doesn't matter, because he could have and should have phrased it differently. And that's the
words matter.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I measure every word very carefully before I tweet it. And I think I only have 11 something thousand followers. But when you're the president of the United States and you have access to 85 million accounts, your tweet should be reviewed by everyone in the White House before it goes out. I don't know what the screening process is for those tweets. I don't think they're going through those rigorous screening process. And I don't think his speeches are being screened properly. And even if they are, I don't think he's actually reading from a script, or at least he starts reading from a script and then he diverges. But ultimately, his words at this moment in time matter more than anyone else's. And I
mean, just today, there was an article that was sent to me that I put up on my Facebook page in regards to how Germany is, the far right in Germany, is embracing Donald Trump. That you have the far right in Germany, which is gaining power and gaining momentum, and they're using Trump as a symbol.
The decision that individuals make halfway across the world to designate someone as their personal hero does not mean that that person is seeking their applause or their attention. And so I don't want to conflate the two. But I
but I will say, though, that Trump is embraced here in the United States by David Duke. He has endorsements by neo-Nazis and by the KKK. And I do know that Trump has come out and has addressed that, saying, I don't embrace these people. But has he done it strong enough? Now, one thing I think we could take away from this conversation today is when we talk about Donald Trump, or we talk about Linda Sarsour, we talk about the right, or we talk about the left, I think it's important for us to footnote our conversations by saying, I am not attacking the right. I am not attacking the left. I'm speaking as a Jew.
Right, and that
About
goes
all, I
back.
mean, this is a takeaway from your articulation, Yoni, from your speaking of anti-Semitism and how we can confront it.
Right, and that goes back to what I said. When we see ourselves as Jews first, we inevitably put aside our self-assignation of whether we're Republicans or Democrats.
So should we say that when we respond to someone on the right or someone to the left, should we footnote that in just a few words? This is not a bipartisan issue. This is not left or right. It's not Republican or Democrat. I'm speaking as a Jew.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that needs to be said in every single conversation. Now, I want to reiterate that, I as a Jew have felt certain invocations of anti-Semitism by Trump. I've certainly felt invocations of anti-Semitism by members of the Republican Party. I've certainly felt invocations of anti-Semitism by members of the Democratic Party. And I don't really care where they stand in Congress. I don't care whether they're blue or red. I don't care. I don't care.
Yoni, I want to commend you on this because you're one of the, I'm not sure if I could use the word few, one of the few Israelis that is not blindly embracing Donald Trump, where a man can come out and say, well, there are fine people on both sides. And that's just, I'm not sure it's the beginning of the end. Again, I'm not here to attack the President of the United States. I'm just here to speak with you in regards to how does one respond to anti-Semitism. That there aren't many, that Israelis are 6,000 miles away. They're not involved in the everyday, today politics. They don't see what's going on here in the States. They're not, their synagogues and temples are not being threatened by the right. It's not jihadists that are threatening Americans right now. It's not the left wing. It's not the Antifa, which is threatening Jews today in the United States. It's white supremacists, and this is through a number of documented actions, also through FBI and Department of Homeland Security saying, hey, you've got Rosh Hashanah and you've got Yom Kippur coming up. Make sure you've got security outside your synagogue.
So, I'll say this in regards to that. First, if I were to go and do a survey, in the United States, I would find that the majority of Americans would probably not know how a government in Israel is formed. I would probably find that the majority of Americans don't know how long a prime minister serves for. They probably would not be able to articulate why Israel had 3 elections in the span of a year. In the same sense, I'm going to hold Israelis to the same standard and understand that the majority of them should not be expected to know how American politics work, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. And the reality is that it's a very challenging perception to take, and I'll share with you the way I see it. Israelis are seeing that states in the Gulf are being more receptive towards opening ties with them. They are seeing that Trump has taken significant action to reduce the terrorist infrastructure that the Palestinian leadership has worked tirelessly to construct. They are seeing significant leadership in terms of short-term concessions and wins for Israel in terms of the Israeli-Arab conflict. But then ask an Israeli to understand the political map of the United States and understand that every issue that one side advocates for immediately falls into the whirlpool of tribalism that I mentioned earlier. Whereas if one side is deemed as pro something, then in the long term, the opposing party might find it beneficial to counteract that by taking the opposite side. And so my fear, I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to happen, but my fear is that Trump has taken very good strategic steps when it comes to addressing the Israeli-Arab conflict, but that his maneuvering of political discourse and domestic politics will take us to a point where, God forbid, support for Israel becomes a partisan issue. And my fear then is, okay, Trump can win another 4 years, but then American history shows us that more likely we're going to have another Democratic president after that, maybe after that as well. And so my fear is that a Democratic president now has to pander to the anti-Israel camp, and I don't want that to happen. So that's my fear. I understand why Israelis are ecstatic about the short-term victories that they've received from this administration. I applaud a lot of these moves from a strategic standpoint. I think UNRWA needed to be defunded. I think the US leaving the Human Rights Council sends a very strong message as to how corrupt that council has become. I think that the Trump administration's decision to recognize Jerusalem could have been timed better, but it was an absolutely necessary step to take in terms of diplomacy. And I think recognizing the Golan Heights was, a very necessary step as well.
Why do you say it's necessary, Yoni? Is it because Israelis want more land, or
No,
they're seeking more security?
no, because for years, and many people don't know this, but for the last 2 or 3 decades, where Palestinian delegations have engaged Israeli delegations in peace talks, all these things have been agreed upon. I mean, the reality that Israel would retain an embassy or a capital in West Jerusalem was never disputed in the last 2 or 3 decades. And Trump's decision to move the embassy to West Jerusalem was not at the expense of a potential US embassy opening up for a future Palestinian state in East Jerusalem. The two were not mutually exclusive. So at one point, for successful diplomacy to actually come to reality, I mean, you have to take the theoretical aspect of the negotiations and at one point start implementing them and making them into reality and not leave them as talking points or bargaining chips on the table, right? The capital of Israel was always going to be West Jerusalem, no matter what outcome would come, whether Jerusalem would stay divided, whether Jerusalem would be united. These, and again, these are putting aside partisan talking points about whatever preference you may have. But Trump's decision to do that was never a move to dismiss a potential US embassy opening up in East Jerusalem. And to the same point, defunding UNRWA. Defunding UNRWA was one of the most strategic moves that could have been done to solve one of the most fundamental issues in the conflict, which was the perpetuating right of return. And
Let me just interrupt you right now because I am watching the clock.
Yeah.
We do have Sami, who's entered into the room here. Sami is a Holocaust survivor, and Sami, if you have a question for Yoni, let me get to you in about 2 minutes because I want to ask Yoni one more question, and then I would like you to have your thoughts, your observations as a Holocaust survivor, speaking to a man who's perhaps 2 generations, maybe 1 generation younger than you. So before I ask you to come in with your thoughts and your questions to Yoni, let me ask Yoni or state one thing, then get his response, and that would be, okay, so Trump moved a building, the U.S. Embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, something that the U.S. Congress had voted on and agreed upon many, many years ago. And Trump did something which no other president had done, although they were supposed to have been doing it. And people would, I would think that the possible reaction of most people was, well, okay, that's all right because it is the capital, but aren't you creating problems? And that was the fear, that was the anxiety by many in the diplomatic field, in the global diplomatic field. Well, you create problems if you do that. Well, people, you were wrong. The embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And what do we have today? We have a peace agreement with the UAE. We're discussing a very potential peace agreement in the next few days, next few weeks, with Morocco, with Bahrain, with Oman. So I guess the assessment that we are going to upset some people was an incorrect assessment. What's your take on that, Yoni?
So I haven't heard of particular talks between Morocco and Oman. I know that Morocco a few weeks ago, following the deal with the UAE and Israel, came out to say that they weren't willing at this point to fully normalize ties with Israel. But certainly Bahrain is up on
And
deck.
Saudi Arabia.
No, also not Saudi Arabia. The foreign minister of Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago came out to reiterate the stance of the kingdom, to say that they reiterate their position that a final peace deal with Israel will only come once an agreement is reached with the Palestinians. We can talk about the seriousness of that statement, at some other point, but certainly, I think Bahrain is up next on deck. Something I predicted, I think, about 5 weeks ago or so. Bahrain was.
I remember your tweet.
Yes. Thank you for confirming that. But Bahrain, first of all, was at the White House, or delegates of Bahrain were at the White House the moment the peace deal of the century was unveiled at the White House. That was certainly an indicator. Bahrain was one of the first, if not the first, countries to come out and applaud the peace deal and show interest in the peace deal, but more importantly, resist the pressure that the Palestinian Authority was trying to impose on Arab countries to continue the course and continue to practice their anti-normalization policies against Israel. I think we're going to see a peace deal. My next prediction is not just that it's going to be with Bahrain, but that we're going to see this next peace deal happen before November 3rd. I think that the Trump administration needs this victory, foreign policy, and more importantly, Bahrain is certainly going to want to take advantage of the ongoing momentum that is happening in the region. And like I said earlier, I know that Saudi Arabia has reiterated their stance that a peace agreement must come first with the Palestinians. I don't know how serious of a statement that is. I think that ultimately it's not the Palestinians who will dictate the terms of what a Saudi-Israeli peace deal would look like. I think Iran's aggressive expansionist policies in the Middle East will dictate that.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you, when we discuss Palestinians, is it really Palestinians or is it really Iranians? Who's really in charge? The Palestinians said this. Are the Palestinians really saying this, or is it Iran who's using the Palestinians to say certain things?
No, I think that in terms of rejecting peace deal, there's an important gap between the Republic of Iran and the Palestinian Authority. I think principally the Palestinian Authority wants to survive a Trump administration. And I think that they are trying to do so by clinging on to the same support for anti-normalization with Israel that they've received for decades. That's what I think is happening.
All right, so now let me invite Sami, who is a Holocaust survivor. Sami, if you could just identify yourself somewhat, let's say in 30 seconds. Sorry, it's only 30 seconds, in terms of your Holocaust experience, and then your questions to Yoni. Yoni, who I guess could be your grandson, right?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say hi, obviously to you and to Yoni.
Hi, Sami.
We are friends on Facebook. I think I met you maybe in person, but with my memory, I don't remember when and where. As a Holocaust survivor, well, you probably know my story. I was subjected to medical experiments, and at the same time, I lived under the poverty line. There is 1/3 of all the Holocaust survivors in the States that live under the poverty line. Regarding the subject, personally, I am not fighting anti-Semitism. You may be surprised, because that refers only to one group of people. I am fighting hatred. In no group of people, no ethnic group, no human being should be persecuted or discriminated. However, we have to differentiate between anti-Semitism and hatred. Anti-Semitism, okay, is unique in its form of hatred, because you can hate somebody because of their religion, you can hate them because of their skin color, you can hate them depending on which country they are coming. Anti-Semitism has been for over 4,000 years. Okay, it was there, it's an ideology, it will never disappear. We just have to fight it to diminish it. The one thing that I personally don't like when I go to schools, campuses all over, okay, I don't like when people use anti-Semitism or hatred, okay, in a political way. All right? This is not a political issue, in my personal opinion. Okay. We also have to recognize, in my personal opinion, okay, you're talking about Trump. Whether I like him or I don't like him, it's irrelevant. But we have to recognize what he did for Israel. And when we use that he did for Israel, A, B, C, do not add but. Okay? Just to recognize it as a fact, something that is helping Israel. When we say but or something else, we are diminishing from what he accomplished for the state of Israel. Combating anti-Semitism can be done only, and that's my personal opinion, only through education. That is my mission in life, to reach as many young people as I can.
Yeah.
In schools and universities. Unfortunately, with the coronavirus, with what's happening right now, a lot of the organization that I'm associated with, okay, don't have the money or whatever it is, and I have not been able, okay, to promote my mission. A lot of the organization, like for instance, ZOA, like a camera, a mat, Stand With Us, they promise that they will help me, okay, promote me, whatever it is. Okay, promises made, promises not kept. And this is one thing that I have to say about Trump, whether you like it or not. Okay, at least he made a promise. You don't have to agree with him, but he kept his promises. He is not a politician. I don't like some of his language. It's not a politician language, but at least, you know, I am not how shall I say, I'm not pro, I'm not against. I do not go into politics.
Yoni, what's your take?
Sure. So first of all, I very fond of Sami and Sami's work, and I think it's very, very, very special to see him have the strength to tour college campuses all across the country and share his stories. At a time where the general American population is so, but majorly disconnected from some of the realities that led to the Holocaust. Some of the statistics are really shocking. First of all, let me say that I agree with Sami on the point that I think that anti-Semitism, and Joel, I know you've seen me tweet about this and talk about this, but anti-Semitism starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews, and I think that's very important. I think if a society feels comfortable dehumanizing an entire group of people, it'll feel comfortable doing that again in the future. I've been very outspoken with what China's doing with the Uyghur.
I spoke on their behalf. I
Yeah.
spoke on their behalf 3 times.
So I'm very familiar with that. I think that to successfully join the fight against racism in this country, theories that apply to combating anti-Semitism can be equally applicable. I think that fighting anti-Semitism, fighting racism go hand in hand. In terms of Sami's point that everything that Trump has done for Israel should be well received and no but should follow, I'm going to very, very respectfully have to disagree. I think that first of all, I don't think anyone who knows me or who knows my work can question my love and loyalty to the Jewish state and to Israel. I've fought for it. I've lost friends to it. Whenever the day comes that I need to put on a uniform again, I'm there. But my job as an analyst is not to have obedience or undying loyalty to any American president. And so everything that Trump does and is favorable for Israel, I will always be happy if it favors Israel, but there's always going to be a side of me, and that's the analytical side, that poses the question, how can this in the future come back to haunt us, or how can this in the future impact us the wrong way? And I will always say thank you, but there's always going to be a skeptical side of me. And that's that. I agree, Sami also mentioned that his language could certainly be improved at times. And I've spoken about that earlier in this interview. And ultimately, I think, again, these conversations are so important. And thank you, Sami, for being on today. I'm a big supporter of your work, and I want to thank you for everything you've done and that you continue to do.
Well,
Sami, I also want to respond.
I am not doing it for me. This is I'm not doing it for a title, to be called all kinds of names. It is my mission. But you mentioned something talking about the Holocaust. There is something that we have to remember. Not every victim during the Holocaust was a Jew.
Yes.
We have to remember that every Jew was a victim. And that is something very important that we have to remember. At the same time, when I also found out the college students, I'm not talking just the young people, but I'm talking the college students, unfortunately, are totally clueless about the background of the Holocaust. They are very apathetic. And my goal when I go to schools and campuses is totally different. In schools, I try to prepare them for the future using myself and the Holocaust, as the background, as an example. But when I go to campuses, what I want them to do is I want them to become active. There's too much apathy in the campuses. They don't react, and when they do react to something, it's many times it's too late. The people have been indoctrinated.
Okay, Sammy, I want to interject here for a second, okay? Because we're running short on time. We have about another 5 minutes left. I also wanted to respond to your views and your perspective in regards to anti-Semitism and Donald Trump. I have to state that I thoroughly and completely agree with Yoni. But man, it's I don't meet many people face to face or online that have a Rosh Gadol, that is a large mind perspective in terms of how a lot of things work. And that is, yes, I believe that Trump's action in terms of implementing the embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a brilliant move. I think it was excellent. It sent a signal to the terrorists that you cannot say, well, the United States is behind us. This is not the capital of Israel. It is the capital of Israel, and now the United States is saying, yes, it is. So it was able to take away some of the meat out of the mouth of those who want to kill us. Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. At the same time, if you have a president who's doing such a brilliant thing, such as moving the embassy and recognizing the Golan Heights, but at the same time, he is doing things domestically to hurt a lot of people. And it's a majority of people, perhaps, that are being hurt. Now I'm saying the same thing as Yoni, I believe, but maybe using different words. It will come back to bite us, because although the Israeli moves were brilliant moves, now you're going to associate those Israeli moves with taking away healthcare. I mean, it's so we have to look at the broad picture in terms of, will this help us or hurt us as a Jew? Will what he's doing create more or less anti-Semitism to the Jew who's living in Miami, New York, in Paris, or in London? So I believe this is a very, very relevant point in terms of being, again, as I say, Rosh Gadol, and understanding the larger picture, that if someone's going to do good for Israel, I just pray to God that they're going to be doing good overall. And we won't find that very often because politicians have their base. Yoni, we entered into this session with asking you how to effectively fight, how to effectively address anti-Semitism. So as we are approaching the holidays of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, correct me if I'm not correct here, you're stating that we need more dialogue. How does the average Jew go about doing that? What platforms can they join? Where can they go to engage? And will they be accepted by the left, by the Jewish Voice for Peace without being banned? Will they be accepted by the right, by the Trump campaign?
So, we have to manage expectations, I think, first and foremost, and we have to understand who our audience is going to be. I've always maintained that there's a 80-10-10 ratio, which 10% is staunchly pro-Israel, 80% is, like Sami said, very apathetic, or just craving more information but not sufficiently educated to take a stance. And then there's the 10% that no matter what we say, their views are their views, and no matter what approach we take, they'll stand and resolve with what they perceive to be true. But that gives us access to 90% of the population. And that means that if you're engaging someone on Facebook and you find that the conversation isn't as productive online as it would be, take 20, 30 minutes of your day to message that person, ask them if they'd be willing to have a conversation offline. You don't have to be necessarily active on social media, but be active in your community. And whether you serve as the bridge that's bringing two people from very, very opposing sides of the political spectrum together, or if you're the one that's facilitating a conversation, just assume that responsibility. Um, you know, I think one of the lines that we should draw was recently seen when a synagogue was vandalized, and when people came out to explain why it was excusable that that synagogue was vandalized, they said, well, there was an Israeli flag that was flying on the synagogue, which means that the synagogue decided to enter the field of politics and take a political stance. And so they were deemed as a proper target for this kind of defamation, which under their explanation was a defamation against Zionism, not against Judaism. I mean, we have to draw the line somewhere as a Jewish community. We have to, at one point, say that enough is enough. And whether you're pro-life or I'm pro-choice, or whether you're pro-gun or I'm anti-gun, that we're able to put that aside for just 1 minute and sit down and talk about how we can each have a meaningful impact in whatever political camp we have by condemning the anti-Semitism that's there. I don't care where you stand politically, I guarantee you that there's anti-Semitism there. So do your part in calling it out and make
Yoni,
sure
I'm going to extend this interview by another 5 minutes. I could say another 5 hours, but I don't think we're prepared for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Let me just address one thing that we haven't talked
Can I
about.
say something?
We
Can I say something?
experience a lot of anti-Semitism. We see a lot of things coming at us from a lot of different places online, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, or other platforms. But many of the accounts that are coming out and attacking Jews and or taking a position for or against, usually against, are not real accounts. There are many fake accounts there coming out of the Internet Research Agency in Moscow.
Yeah. So, you know, ultimately, I think if you take some time to measure the validity of the accounts, you'll be able to realize whether it's a bot or it's an actual person.
How can you do that?
Well, you know, again, I don't like to yield my platform to accounts that don't have a significant following, but there are accounts out there that are verified and they're held by prestigious or well-regarded public figures, and those are the accounts that I try to monitor. And if they cross a certain line, I try to approach with some degree of sensibility or respect, unless they have a known history or record of.
So if you're trying to engage an account and that account just responds to you, to your well-articulated 3 or 4 line response with Trump 2020, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to block them? Are you going to ban them? I mean,
I don't block. I don't block accounts unless they are actively calling for the death of Jews or the death of Israelis. I don't block accounts. I think that's a very cowardly move. I think Linda Sarsour was a coward when she felt the need to silence me and silence so many
and
other.
who is Linda Sarsour for those who don't? Who are aware?
Linda Sarsour was a former leader of the Women's March. She is unfortunately a somewhat respected civil rights activist, preeminent in left American culture.
Who is Farrakhan?
Yeah,
I'll help you out here. It's okay.
yeah, no, I know that there's certainly been recorded posts where she has either applauded his work or applauded him as a figure. Linda Sarsour is just one of those figures who has pandered to the anti-Israel camp and has uh, foolishly and baselessly invoked intersectional approaches to understanding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and has sort of made ridiculous comparisons between oppression against Black Americans in the United States to that of Palestinians. So she's a very controversial figure who does not like to be
So,
called out.
so Linda's one person. In my last question to you is, an American Jew wants to try to create an area, a space for debate, for discussion, for understanding. Where does that American Jew go to? Which personalities would you suggest that personalities and or groups would they? Now, one thing you said, and I compliment you on it, is let's not talk to ourselves. Let's not speak into an echo chamber. Okay, let's go to places where maybe it's outside of our comfort zone. Maybe going to Code Pink, maybe the Jewish Voice for Peace, which is not for peace.
So these are the groups that you're mentioning are part of the 10% that no matter what we do are not going to be open or receptive to what we're discussing.
But they have a strong impact, don't they?
Um, they are tokenized by anti-Israel activists who like to make the point that Judaism and Zionism are not intertwined. But again, they're a very, very, very fringe and small population of Jews living in America. Their opinions are borderline irrelevant. But I think that ultimately we have to surround ourselves by individuals who are willing to have a discussion and who are willing to adhere to the principles of civil discourse. And I think that oftentimes we have to resort to taking that conversation offline and making the time to have conversations with individuals who are willing to take that time as well.
So again, what personalities and or organizations?
Right.
I
So
don't know much about the internet. Where do I go, Yoni?
So first of all, I'm inclined to be biased by CAMRA, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis, is just instrumental, I think, in the conversation, not just about the conflict, but in a conversation about anti-Semitism. I can tell you, I worked there for 2.5 years, and I was surrounded by colleagues who were not fond of Trump's policies or were fond of Trump's policies, but they were in a very professional and courteous and admirable way able to transcend whatever political differences they had to bring to their very wide audience an unbiased look as to what side was propagating anti-Semitism or what side was disseminating false information. So CAMRA is absolutely a go-to organization.
How about Canary Mission?
Yeah, I like the fact that Canary Mission puts a face to anti-Semitism. I like the idea that they make they hold anti-Semites accountable, and more importantly, I think in the future we need to see how we can shed light on Canary Mission to places of employment, and that there should be a thorough background check on some of the people who have a very long-standing record of not only invoking anti-Semitism but violence against members of the Jewish community, And these places of employment should absolutely take that into account when engaging in a hiring process. Not just that, but learning institutions as well.
For the Jewish News Agency, Joel Leyden, I want to thank Yoni for being with us today. Yoni is definitely among the most articulate Jewish voices, informed voice in regards to Jewish and Israeli public affairs. Today we've been discussing anti-Semitism, how to confront it, how to address it. If you want to follow somebody on Twitter who will not let you down, that you will learn a heck of a lot of information from in regards to Jewish and Israeli public affairs, please follow Yoni on Facebook and please follow Yoni on Twitter. Joel Leyden for the Jewish News Agency. We'll be back again soon. In the meantime, let me wish you Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Thank you so much.
Now I'm going to cut the video there. Now this is between us. Yoni, yo. You're terrific.
Thank you so much.